GM friends, and welcome to the future of gaming. You're listening to our weekly FOGcast. We've got Devin Becker, we've got myself, Nico Vereecke, and we have a special guest whose name on the internet is LordOfAFew, also known as Loaf. We kind of asked him to join because last week when we had our town square, we had some questions about how to use AI in games, and people wanted to know some companies, some projects that were actually using Stable Diffusion and the like inside or for their games. Loaf is, when you think about it, he's actually doing a bunch of stuff on the edge. So he's using AI in games, but he's also building a on-chain game on Starknet. And so we're going to dive into Starknet versus EVM, how a ZK rollup changes what you do and the things that are possible on a ZK rollup versus a EVM-based chain or rollup. And then we're also going to go into a concept called account abstraction, which is going to be, I think, something very important moving forward. But not a lot of people talk about that right now. So that's the intro. Hey, Devin, everyone knows you. But
that's
Loaf,
good to know.
Sorry?
That's good to know. Thanks.
Loaf, could you give us like maybe a 2-minute background on yourself before we dive in?
GM. Yeah, good to be here. I think this is my third time now.
Yeah, it's a new podcast though.
It's a new podcast. All right. Same presenter. All right. Yeah. So a bit of background about myself. I've been a long time crypto investor. Been in Web2, kind of building tech stacks for quite a long time, building businesses, and I kind of was on the fringe for a while in the crypto space. Picked up Solidity in 2016, but decided not to continue. That was a mistake, but here we are. And then, kind of watched crypto go up and down a few times, and then, DeFi started to happen, and I started to kind of pick my ears up again, and so I kind of got back involved, looking for something to do, and obviously a long-time gamer and all-round nerd. The NFT craze happened, and then Loot happened, and Loot totally nerd-sniped me into this whole idea of this open source, Creative Commons world build, all the way back, a year and a couple months ago now. And so I saw that and I was like, okay, this is something that I'm, willing to commit to and trying to build this thing on the edge. And so Loot happened, and then Loot Realms happened. And myself and Redbeard, we decided on a weekend just to build up a website called Bibliotheca, which was it was basically just a subgraph. You could see all your loot items on one page, and we did that, and then it kind of led to one thing led to another, and we connected with the Realms dev, and we decided to build an on-chain game. And long story short, we tried to build the on-chain game on Arbitrum originally, but we quickly realized that we didn't quite like L2's. We'll go deeper into this, but L2's opened the design space up a bit, but back then Arbitrum was quite early, and its DEVM is still quite constrained, so we kind of failed in our implementation of what we wanted to build, so we kind of flipped over to Starknet, and this is what we've been building for the last 9 months. So we are deep building a game called Eternum, which is based around the Loot Realms NFTs and in the Lootverse, and we're also going to be using the Loot NFTs and a bunch of other things that we're building as well. But our real what we're really interested in is this whole idea of this pure on-chain worlds, eternal worlds, autonomous worlds, whatever you want to call them. This idea that once you deploy these games, they run autonomously on these chains basically until those chains die. So they're totally open source, permissionless, and controlled by the developer and the player. So yeah, that was a little quick run through.
Fantastic, appreciate it. Let's talk a bit about how you're using the new AI models that we've seen everywhere on social media.
Yeah.
How does that work? And perhaps it's useful for you to describe like the way you work and the people that you work with, because if you're on YouTube, you'll see that we're not speaking to a person here, we're speaking to a black screen or a loaf of bread, whatever that turns out to be in post editing. And so could you tell us a bit more about how you're working, and then also how AI comes into that?
Yeah. So, when we started this project, we, I've built businesses in the past, and this idea of, cross-border collaboration, without, any entity as a DAO, really appealed to me. So, I thought, let's experiment and try to build this organization in that way. And there's a lot of hardness to that in terms of like its persistence. There's not a centralization risk. Comes with its challenges as everyone's distributed. But yeah, we kind of, the Bibliotheca DAO, we work as a distributed team under a DAO. And we're the custodians of the code right now, but it's really, we're building this game with the whole DAO. So that's kind of how we work. There's about 13 contributors, like kind of core contributors that are like part-time, full-time, and semi-time, whatever you want to call it. But really there's a lot of other outside contributors that participate, like Nico, yourself, you pop in and add your 2 cents as well. So it's like this collective world build that we're building this game. And so that comes with its challenges because we're on a budget. We don't have a massive art department, which is really what the cost of most games actually are, if you think about it. Like it's you pay armies of artists and designers to build these intricate 3D models and scenes and rig them all up and all that stuff, right? So actually one of our engineers on our team, Dham, he actually, I don't know if anyone remembers, but he about a year and a half ago, like what was that? Loot Mart, that was in September last year. I think it was like a month after Loot launched. Anyway, he started using this diffusion models, which is what Stable Diffusion and Midjourney is. It's the guts of it, but it was a really early version of it. This was before MJ or Stable Diffusion or DALL-E existed. And he actually used these diffusers to build images of the loot items in the very, very early days. So this was ages ago, right? And that was like the first kind of glimpse I had of this, like, text to image models. And it was very primitive back then. I don't know, you could probably dig it up, but it was Loot Mart, and I'll try and get a link, and you can put it in your notes. But you can see, like, it's just in like 14 months, it went from that to MJ right now, which is like high fidelity, photorealistic. Like it's past the uncanny zone, right? So Dham started on that a while ago, and we've always been kind of like thinking, is it ready? This like software, right? And like it was like, it's kind of, it hasn't really been ready up until about a month ago, to be honest. Like even Midjourney 3 is like, it's just not quite right. Like it doesn't create really high fidelity images. Like some of it's good, but some of it's not. Like it's very, very hit and miss. And then Midjourney 4 is actually incredible. Like it's mind blowing every single day. Blows my mind. And so for the last like 8 months, we've been kind of dabbling in it, like building these, playing around with infrastructure, like how are we going to incorporate this into our workflow and whatnot. And then Midjourney happened. It just kind of caught us, and we're like, okay, let's just do everything in it, and let's crowdsource a lot of these images directly from the DAO. Let people in the DAO, prompt and create these images, and then let's use these images in the client. And if we don't like the client after like a couple days, we can just chuck it out and recreate images. And they're like, they're ridiculously good. Like this has totally changed the game for game developers forever. And it's still like these things are like 2 years old. Like in 6 months' time, they're I think the Stable Diffusion engineers, just on a tangent, they said. It was one of them. I think it was MJ or Stable Diffusions. Anyway, they said, actually, I think it was Midjourney. They said every 2 months they're going to have a significant fidelity boost in their model for the next like year. So there's like 6 incremental jumps until they think that the technology will start to plateau. So like it's good now, but like Midjourney 10 in like a year will be like, I mean, it'll probably be like, you could whip up a 3D model or like a full-on 3D scene that you can walk through in a matter of 30 seconds. I'm you can tell I'm pretty excited about it. And like, we were thinking like, oh, we're gonna have to hire an art team and all this stuff. And now like, well, now we don't. Now we can really leverage what DAOs are good for, is like, this whole collective consciousness of all these people around the world, working asynchronously, and it's very easy to teach someone how to prompt an image. It's very hard to teach someone how to draw a high fidelity image, right? Like, I mean, not many people can even do it, even if you did teach them for 2 years. So yeah, it's very exciting. And then there's a whole GPT-3 thing, which is a whole other can of worms. But yeah.
So you have a bunch of non-technical, non-designy people in your DAO that are just excited about what you're doing, and you've taught them, or they taught themselves, how to write prompts, and now you're leveraging your community to generate visual assets for your game.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So, and most people actually aren't artists. Like I can't paint, but you can teach people to prompt, right? It's quite an easy thing to do. So yeah, and that's we can leverage everyone, and we could even have like an entire client challenge where have your 20 assets you need, and do a challenge who can create the next client, and you can have like 20 different clients. You can choose what you want to play the game as, and you could do that in like a week.
It's crazy.
It's bananas.
Devin, with your game building experience, what does this does this put questions in your head around the cohesiveness of art, for example? Because as far as I understand, in any game, there's this one, I would say, center truth core of visual identity that then things branch out of. I'm assuming that is at the moment not self-evident to do with these Midjourney models.
Yeah, so I think the thing is, like, we're kind of like, we're not at the point yet where this stuff is really built for that kind of purpose. And so you end up in a situation where it's great for generating lots of one-off images, generating stuff that has a specific identity to it. Right now, the hack for that is to use particular art styles, right? Like where you can give it an artist style and have it replicate that artist style. That's basically the hack to say, okay, well, I'm basically hiring that artist, from the grave or whatever, to do it, like sort of like deep faking someone who's dead, right? Like, an Elvis hologram or something. And so it's this idea that you can do that part. But then we get to the point where like we start to wonder, okay, down the line, can we start to train it on our custom art styles? Can we take a whole bunch of, say, concept art for a game, train it on that and as like a custom set or something like that, to then skew future art, like where you say, hey, this is a source image for the art style or a couple of images. Can you now use this and apply this art style to future generated prompts? And obviously, I think we're still probably a little ways away from that level of quickly doing that sort of thing. Yeah.
That's exactly where it's heading, right? It's like that's the secret sauce, because like anyone can use these models, right? But like you have to, the key is going to be training them on your data, and then you own that data, and then like that's how you get your uniqueness to your identity, right?
I think that'll be the big things where we start to see like things like forking, custom data sets, stuff like that, where it starts to be something that's less of like a monolithic data training set that everyone's using, where everyone can use the same data set, and you start to get to more like almost like kind of building your own moat around your particular generative AI, whether that be a per game, per publisher. Like obviously a publisher's data set can be really valuable if it's across multiple games, stuff like that. But the big challenge, of course, is going to be characters, right? Like dealing with characters is going to be a lot harder than doing like, say, scenes in a certain style, right? Like, because there's certain keywords you can use to get a certain style, like, cyberpunk or synthwave or whatever, or like, gothic. Those kind of keywords can give you a specific like semi-generic style that you can apply across buildings and vehicles and things like that. I don't think that's difficult to do as long as it's like applying to a genre or theme that people can readily understand anyways. It's more like, how do I take this character, put them in different poses, different scenes? Now, of course, if you can generate like a single, say, 3D model, right? That could be generated, tweaked, whatever. The way character creators are in games, right? Where that is a generative model for a character, right? That you're sitting there adjusting sliders and parameters. And we start to get that sort of thing combined with prompts. Then we can get a 3D character that we can then place in a generated scene and start to combine assets. Because right now it's like, we'll generate one big image. When we start to get to more combined asset stuff, I think that's where we get the flexibility to do a lot more with it, whether that be 3D or just simple, layered composites, stuff like that. It reminds me of like matte paintings that we would do for movies back in the day, right? Like we'd have all these matte painting backgrounds, and it's like, do we start just using them like for now as like matte painting backgrounds and then apply stuff in the foreground? I think it's going to be kind of hacks for a while, right? But the nice thing is the hacks will help kind of pave the way for what is a good workflow. as people figure out like the different problems. So people like Loaf, trying to use this stuff in games, like, yeah, it's going to be rough, like doing it. And like there's advantages and disadvantages, but that's the only thing that's going to push this sort of thing forward. And it's funny hearing Loaf talk about like the Midjourney, like huge leaps. It almost sounds like we're going towards this sort of Moore's Law age of AI stuff where we're getting these big leaps. Like when you went from, GPT-3, like original stuff to Chat GPT, it just felt like this huge leap. I think we're going to kind of go through, maybe it's not like truly Moore's Law, but these big leaps where we're like building on top of previous things. And then I think them opening it up and lots of people experimenting with it, like what's happening right now with the art stuff and the Chat GPT stuff, that's what's really going to drive it forward, because people pushing it to the limits, seeing what it could do, trying to use it for commercial products where like there's like something actually on the line and not just hobby, deviant art kind of style generating stuff. I think that's where it's really going to like start to force people to actually develop practical tools.
Yeah.
So maybe we're not there yet, but people like Loaf are obviously going to help with that.
Yeah, it's the pipelines, I think, that are really going to be key. It's like plugging GPT-3 into telling GPT-3 to generate prompts, and then you automatically feed those prompts back into Midjourney, and then you automatically feed that back into like a upscaler, which then feeds into another model that animates the face or something, and you connect up all these models together, and that's how you have your that's your pipeline to turn it into your app or your game or whatever. I think we're going to see a lot of applications like that.
I want to see a lot of hacks more around the memory system too, in the sense of like right now we kind of have to re-explain stuff a lot, right? There's a very limited memory, short-term memory in these kind of systems.
Yeah.
I think when we start to kind of bolt on different systems where you can customize that sort of memory as part of that pipeline, so you're not having to regenerate a lot of these essential elements from scratch, and you're not also having to train a whole data set. It's more like this sort of plug-in memory database where you're like, here's a bunch of contextual elements, so I don't have to re-include them in my prompt, and I don't have to train them into my data set. And you can start to bolt on these sorts of things that kind of help shim in your customizations. I think that'll be an interesting thing to see at some point as well.
I was reading a piece. It's called Before the Flood. I'll also link it in the notes. And it made a really interesting point, which is that the amount of businesses that could be built with the current state of these AI technologies is crazy, right? We already mentioned a few. Like the technology is there to make it so that you can, from one core art image, start building all of the art you need for your game, right? The technology is there. But then we're going to have these leaps over the next freaking year that are going to be, every 2 months a significant move forward, which is going to just exponentially grow what the hell we can do with this. And so I think, AI in general is not over. Gaming and AI is not over, and it's going to be interesting because I feel like a team like the Realms team that Loaf's leading, you're in a prime position to take full advantage of these technologies, and so maybe you'll be leapfrogging ahead of everyone else over the next year.
Yeah, well, I think we just have the benefit of just being able to experiment like en masse, in the open, and we can just go crazy. Just a team of nerds tinkering. I mean, that's what pushes everything forward, right? But yeah, no, I feel like the Industrial Revolution. You had the steam engine, right? You just replaced human labor, and AI is like. And that got us a massive leap forward in our productivity, and I feel like it has been this whole like talk about. I remember reading in 7 years ago, all the Silicon Valley people saying it's going to be startup plus AI, and like it's taken like 7 years. Like now in the next year, it's going to be startup plus AI. In the last 7 years, it's been like a few that have like been willing to create these models, but now these models are so freely available. It's just like make an app that does X, Y, and Z using 2 models, and then bang, you have 100,000 users. But I think there's going to be definitely a bubble in that, so do watch out as well. But yeah, the AI is just this tool that like just increases your productivity. I mean, I'm already using it as Copilot in my VS Code, and I'm using GPT-3 to answer questions immediately, and it's maybe not 10x my productivity, but it's definitely like 2-3x if you use it correctly, and that the compounding effect that has on everything is crazy.
The risk I see with stuff like that, even like Copilot, as well as all these other things, is some of the shallowness.
Could we just contextualize Copilot for a second?
Yeah,
I think it's important.
Go ahead and explain it, Love.
Copilot, so it's made by the same company that does GPT-3 OpenAI, but it's like a plugin into your code editor, and what it basically like auto completes or makes suggestions whilst you're writing code. So if you're writing, it's really good for JavaScript because it's like a billion lines of JavaScript and it's quite a simple language. So say if you like, there's all these like weird one-liner functions you can do in JavaScript, and like it's very hard to like remember absolutely 100% of them. But so you like, if you need to remember one, you just do like / how do you reduce like 3 arrays, the nested objects and stuff, and then it'll just give you that code, and it's like boom. And like the alternative to doing that would be like, okay, I'm going to go to Google, I'm going to write it in, I'm going to go through a few Stack Overflow, then I'll find it, then I'll use it, right? That's basically what most programming is. But this way, it's like bang in my editor, and then I'm ready to go, like within like 5 seconds.
And to be fair, ChatGPT has also been banned from Stack Overflow for giving answers for extra context there. So that's an interesting side effect.
Yeah, it doesn't get it right. Like it's not like perfect, but it's like it's better than not having it. Like it's like some things you're like, why did it do that? But then some things you're like, okay, that's right. It's surprisingly good at writing comments as well. It just knows what you want to comment, so you don't have to type it out. That's actually what I've used most of it for.
I mean, that's definitely helpful because as a programmer myself, I know how much work that is in itself, just getting your code commented.
Yeah.
I do worry about the shallowness and genericness problem. So like what happens first off, if you're all using the exact same shared database or training set, right, is you're all going to get relatively similar answers, right? That's one thing. There's a little bit of lack of variety. I mean, obviously there are systems where like ChatGPT, for example, could provide some different stuff with some of the randomness function in terms of like different responses to the same prompt. But it doesn't necessarily have the same kind of problem solving, sort of like think out of the box sort of nature that people do. And you end up with situations where a lot of times the results you get from these systems are good, but not great because they're shallow. They lack certain, and I don't want to say humanist because I think that's overrating humans. I'm not a big fan of that idea in movies where like humans are some special thing and, well, we got to save it and preserve it and it's all our flaws that make us special and all that junk. Not a fan. I'm a little too much into the transcendence side, but I do think there is like a little something, that we don't have in there yet, right? That sort of, I don't know if you want to call it soul, I guess, but it's more like it's creativity or like variance to it that is not just randomness, but rather some other stuff. And so I think we're going to have the situation where maybe we just need more differentiated training sets. Maybe we need more like people that are really good at piloting the AI in a certain way with the prompts, stuff like that. But I think for a while, there will be a period where everything's kind of a little generic because that's what it is, right? If it's based off these kinds of statistical models and other ways of like genericizing something, because that's what it is, right? You're taking a training set, you're extracting the sort of generic elements from it in a way, like that's not the exact way, but that's the basic result. And therefore you're getting in a way like an amalgamation of generic results. And so like, obviously then the creativity is in the prompt to try and get around that, right?
I think that's why it's good with code, right? Because like,
but then you have code being straight up stolen, like the fast square root function that still had like John Carmack's like swearing comments in it.
Yeah. Well, surprisingly, it's picked out some pretty good functions whenever I've used it. Some things it does wrong, but like, you don't need to reinvent the wheel on every single function that you do. Or every, script that you're trying to write, right? It just
that's why John Carmack's one was a great example because it's like this was still the best function that someone wrote. And so there's a good reason to steal that. But I just mean like if we can do that, we're also not going to reinvent the wheel, which in itself is an adaptability problem, which like at some point we start ending up like homogenizing stuff. And anyone who's been in like cybersecurity and other stuff like that knows that the problems with homogeny, like in terms of adaptability and like flexibility to deal with problems. So we do have to be like, these aren't big problems, but these are concerns to keep in mind as we go through this phase.
Yeah. And just to be clear, it's definitely not AGI. It's far from it. Meaning artificial, it's not a general intelligence software. This is just a chat
no Skynet
thing
yet.
right now. It's definitely not. No, it's got a long way to go for that. But yeah.
Fantastic. Let's move on to perhaps account abstraction, because I know that Loaf was particularly eager to talk about that. Can you give us a background about what it is, and then we can go into why it's important? And I would say that it seems to me that it's especially important since the FTX collapse. But give us a background there.
Yeah, well, let's not go into that. But yeah, that was everything that crypto isn't. But yeah, so account abstraction is this. I mean, it's been talked about, on the Ethereum roadmap for a long time, and right now with Ethereum, you have two types of accounts. You have your UA accounts, and then you have your contracts. And that's when you use MetaMask. That's your account, right? And then you have your contracts. Your ERC20 contracts or whatever other contracts you want, right? Account abstraction basically is this idea of like there is no two types. There's just one thing. There's just one type of account, which is your contract. And so your account is a contract. And what that means is that you can basically, you can program your account to do whatever you want, right? So, you can program your account to be, when I receive ETH into that account, it'll automatically sell it on Uniswap for USDC or whatever. Now that's like a very, very simple example, but think of it as like a everyone knows what a plugin, right? Is a plugin extends a program, right? And so think of your account now in these account abstraction networks like Starknet and ZK Sync as your account, and you can use these plugins to extend the functionality of your account, right? And so one plugin could be that what I just described you, that little script that converts any ETH that hits your wallet gets automatically converted into USDC if the price is right or something. Another application would be, okay, I'm going to add a session key plugin, which will allow me to play will allow you to play games without actually using your account, and so you can the session key will actually make signatures, will sign transactions for you in the background, so you don't have to do the annoying pop-up and sign every transaction. And so we can go deep into session keys, but yeah, so that's like that. I think I may have speed run that a little too much, but I think that the overarching principle is that account abstraction means that there's one account type on a network, and it comes with these great quality of life improvements. And you just mentioned FTX, and so the problem with FTX is that it was FTX was holding everyone's money, right? And no one knew what was doing it. No one knew what they were doing with it, right? And so this is the benefit of self-custody, right? You need to hold your coins. You need to hold your coins on your wallet, and you need to have your private key. And don't ever keep anything on an exchange unless you're trading. That's the rule of thumb. And so account abstraction, well, I mean, I don't think. I guess it would have saved some people, but I think what you were getting at is this whole idea of like account recovery, right? Is that what you're trying to prod out? Yeah. And so right now with Ethereum, you have this like you have your 12 seed phrase, right? So 12 word seed phrase, and if that gets exposed or something, your account's dead forever. With account abstraction, you could actually have this idea of like this trusted party, and you could actually recover your account, and you could change your private key to that account, so you could get your account back. And so there's some really interesting companies working in that space, especially Argent, a big French company. So I'll definitely check them out. But yeah, that was a brief run through of that. But what do you guys have to add to that?
Sounds like security problems.
So just to make sure that we're all on the same page, I'm going to try and explain it to you in my words, which are simple words, because I'm 5 years old in many ways. We can program smart contracts on the EVM. On Ethereum, I can program a smart contract, and that gives it like flexibility, and I can do a bunch of cool stuff with that. And so the example that you gave, where if I want to send something to an address and have that sold automatically, we can do that with a smart contract today because we can program it. What we can't program today is my wallet. Like I can't program my own wallet, and through account abstraction, all wallets or all accounts become programmable, and that means that we can start programming user-owned wallets as well. Is that a good explanation?
Yeah, that's a good example. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's worth keeping in mind that smart contracts already kind of have a wallet. Like they have their own
they are
ability to
a
store.
wallet, yeah.
So like they are like a wallet plus. So in theory, you could already do that today by just making a smart contract that acts kind of as your wallet, but then you still need some way to sign that and transact with it, which means you still need also your own wallet. And so like
exactly.
it's kind of a little messier to do it
clunky.
the way things are now.
Exactly. It's very clunky. But yeah, I mean, some of the really interesting things, especially in gaming, since this is a very gaming focused podcast, and what we're doing with Realms is this idea of like a native multi-call, and you can do multi-calls like on the regular EVM, but you have to it's quite a convoluted technique to do it. And so I say native multi-call, which means that I can basically just queue up all these transactions. So I can go around in my game and I can be like, I'm going to build this, I'm going to build that, I'm going to claim, I'm going to trade, I'm going to do all this stuff. And so I queue all those transactions up, and it goes into my thing called a transaction cart. And I can just do one signing, and it signs all those transactions in one signature. And so I can basically get 20 transaction throughput, with one signature. And so with games, that's very, very handy because you don't have to sign everything, right? And the transactions execute, sequentially, so they just go one after the other. And so you can actually queue them up so the state matches, and you can be like, I'm going to buy resources, and then I'm going to build my castle, and then I'm going to build my troops, and they're all dependent on one another. And so that's a really interesting kind of UX that we're working on.
Somewhere between a single transaction and a roll-up kind of thing, right?
Yeah, kind of. But yeah, it's when you kind of when you go from a game that can do one transaction at a time to a game that can do 10 transactions at a time, it's a big change. The other there's another thing I just remembered. And so there's a company building on StarkNet right now called Cartridge, and they're trying to abstract this whole, they're basically trying to improve the UX 100x, to onboard the next million people into games. And so what they've done is in iOS devices, there's this thing called a secure enclave, and a secure enclave is like a kind of a separated little memory store that you can store encrypted information in, and it's not accessed by the rest of the phone. And so what they've done is they've actually used account abstraction and StarkNet to you can create an account with your biometrics, and it automatically saves your private key into the secure enclave, and you can sign transactions in with your biometrics. Now that's only because of account abstraction you can do that. So that's a really cool a cool thing that's been built right now.
Definitely have some concerns about some of this stuff too when it comes to the idea of what Nico was saying, for example, about thinking about plugins and things like that. Is if you look, for example, the way browser plugins end up being if we start depending on these sort of other third-party dependent things to inject into our wallet, let's say MetaMask supported plugins, even, for example, right? Or maybe it does. I just using this example, but you get a lot of malicious Chrome plugins, for example, that go into the browser. And I could see the same thing for MetaMask, right? Where people are going to have to be a little bit vigilant about the kinds of things that they integrate into their wallet. Because right now, if you have a wallet, you just have the seed phrase, you have the password, the private key essentially is just all variations of the private key. But as long as that private key is secure, you're fine for the most part, right? Whereas if you start to introduce other bits of code that can interact with your wallet or interact with your balance, basically, then that starts to become a little bit riskier in some ways. But I guess it's less risky than letting SBF hold your money. So I guess it's progress. But I do think it's important to kind of let's make sure that we have people, if we move towards this, that are auditing these, that are making sure that there's some kind of safety check mark. Yeah. So there's not logic bombs and stuff built into these account abstractions. Yeah,
unfortunately, I feel that you've raised a good point. We need to be very, very aware of that. But yeah, Argent are a great team, and they're kind of leading the whole charge on that whole idea of a plugins system. So, but yeah, it's still super early. StarkNet's still kind of alpha. This whole idea of account abstraction is very, very early. Well, it's been the idea for it's been around for a while, but actual implementation of it is quite early. So, we're still trying to figure out this whole UX. That was kind of the challenge with building the game that we're building. It's like, how do we really lean into this whole, new UX? And so it's taken some challenge and playing around to try to crack that UX, to really leverage it.
Is this, you mentioned that account abstraction is natively built into StarkNet and ZK Sync. Is this a ZK rollup type, like unique to ZK rollups? But you also mentioned that Ethereum is also looking at this. How does it?
I think ZK Sync's got their own like VM design, and so does StarkNet. And by VM I mean like they run on this their own Cairo virtual machine, right? And the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM, that's what mainnet runs on. That's what all these optimistic rollups run on, and the sidechains run on. They run on different tuned EVMs, but that comes with its constraint of what the EVM is. That's why it's built, and the EVM doesn't have a native account abstraction built into it. It's a total architecture change needed for it. They are kind of pushing for it. Maybe in the next year, they're going to do an upgrade that will make it a lot easier, but it'll still be opt-in, so it won't be quite native. But you'll still get some quality of lives. But the Cairo VM, for example, is like they build it up from the ground up, and so when they were making the design decisions to build it, they were like, okay, well let's really lead what Ethereum wanted to be, and so they weren't constrained by the EVM. They built it from the ground up, and they decided to build a native account abstraction into the machine itself, and so that's why I say native account abstraction. Yeah, and so they're not constrained by the EVM. They can just do what they want, which is real positive. There's definitely like a philosophical debate around what's going to win out in the end. Like, is it going to have to be everything EVM, or can you have some VMs and some EVMs, and then they
still got Mac and PC, so you never know.
Yeah, well, I just I think it's short-termism, the thinking like that. Like, this is a multi-decade like transition, right? Like, blockchains aren't going away. We wouldn't be having this conversation if we did, right? Like, these are going to be around for decades, and so we're arguing right now about, well, my VM doesn't quite interop with like MetaMask, but like, I mean, who cares? Like, it's like early right now. We don't really have it. Like, no one's really using blockchains right now. And why shall we, bring the baggage of what the EVM is? The EVM is a great like low power machine, right? But like, if we want something that can like, push applications like dApp designs forward and open up new design spaces, then we shouldn't take that baggage. Unless we absolutely have to, but we don't have to, right? We can run our own VMs and then settle onto, mainnet, and so that's why I like the design decision of what StarkNet's done. It's like, well, like it's early right now. It's kind of annoying to develop with, but like, who cares? It's it will catch up, and then when it catches up, well, then what's the difference? Well, we got this, well, not me, but like the Cairo VM will have a leg up because it does not constrained by the EVM. But that being said, I think there's so much block space needed that everyone is going to have, that there's not just going to be one VM in my mind. One
of the reasons why I love having Loaf on is because Loaf, you're like, I don't know, 5 years ahead of anyone else in blockchain games thinking about these things. Now everyone's like, how do I stop people selling my NFTs, man? My floor price is crashing. And you're like,
my Bored Ape got stolen. What do I do?
Yeah. Anyway, good. No, this was fantastic. I think, Loaf, we're going to have to get you back on. I hope by then that you figure out a way for us to look at something while you're speaking. And we should talk a bit more about StarkNet and how it is, building over there. We've talked about it a bit, but I think not with someone who's actually building there.
Yeah, it's I'd love to any time. Just to round off, I think there's you mentioned like ZK. We could probably do a whole topic on ZK if we wanted to, but StarkNet isn't like it's Starks are like they can be zero knowledge or they don't have to be, and so StarkNet isn't actually zero knowledge. It's called a validity rollup. So it's not using zero knowledge proofs in its network. You will be able to in the future. They'll do like a private network, but right now it really uses the properties of these Stark proofs to build the network. And same with ZK Sync. So I'm not like I don't have the time to fully deep dive into ZK Sync's architecture, but yeah. But yeah, just to finish on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's clear that when I'm talking about these things, I'm slightly over my skis. So it's going to be good to have a session where you walk us through the details there.
Yeah, love to.
Good. All right. Fantastic. Well, Loaf, thanks for coming on as a guest. Devin, thanks for joining us in the middle of your night, or I would say it's the middle of the night, but it's the middle of your day.
It's his daytime.
So it's my afternoon.
Yeah. Exactly. Good. All right. Thank you both. Right. Listener, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed, feel free to let us know if you learned something. Feel free to let Loaf know. Loaf, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter, LordOfAFew, or you can pop into our Discord, which you can find just on my Twitter handle. You'll be able to find the link. So just LordOfAFew. Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. And speak to you next week.